Hi everyone, it's Maylee here from Maylee Designs and welcome to my channel. Today I'm going to be talking about how I turned sewing thread into yarn. I've been experimenting with this technique now for almost a year and so many of you have questions. Since I've been doing a lot of trial and error with this technique, I decided that it was finally time to do a full review on the process. I'll also be doing a tutorial and giving you a sneak peek on my upcoming project. If you want to see more from me and my crazy experiments, don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe. First, let's talk about how I came up with this idea. I've always wanted to create custom colorways for my designs. However, I really didn't want to deal with the learning curve or the hassle of hand dyeing my own yarn. I have seen popular yarn providers from the Philippines who create the most beautiful and unique looking colorways. After seeing people crochet with their yarn, I realized that it seems to be made out of thread being held together. On the same day, I opened my Joann Fabrics app and realized that they were having a huge sale on thread. So I decided to add a bunch of colors to my cart, check out, and then go pick them up. As soon as I got home, I immediately opened them all and I held all of the threads together in my hands and immediately just started crocheting with them. I absolutely fell in love with the outcome and realized that I wanted to use this technique to make more of my clothing. To make it easier on me, because I like to travel when I crochet, I decided to cake the thread. There are a lot of things that I wish I would have done differently during this process, and I'm going to go over how to do that later in the video. At the end of the day, though, I really loved the final outcome of the piece that I made. Unfortunately for me, it ended up being a little bit too big, but I'm going to show you what it looks like. So this is the Barbara Cardi from Yala Stitched. And as you can see, it came out to be more of a peachy, dusty pink look. It has pinks, blues, and oranges in it, and I'll hold it up closer so you can see. It's so pretty, and unfortunately, since it's too big, I do plan on frogging it, but I want to remake this cardigan again at some point, but I'll probably use the yarn for something else. I also want to show you this dress that I made last year, and I think it came out just so pretty. It's so lightweight, and I can't wait to wear this more this year. Unfortunately, I finished it later last year after Bridgerton came out because I just think it's so Bridgerton coded. So now that I showed you what the final garments that I made look like, I'm going to tell you all about how I caked this thread and the things that I would do differently. So about a week ago, while I was in the middle of releasing this sweater pattern, which is my Weaving Willow sweater, I posted on social media that I really just needed a break from pattern writing and I wanted to work on a personal project. I made some swatches and I posted them on social media for you all to vote on which one was your favorite. I posted a cream, brown, and beige one, a bluey seafoam green one, and also a more lilac one. And the winner ended up being the blue seafoam and cream colorway. So I actually already started this project and this is what the yarn cake looks like right now. It's just so pretty. And this is what I have done so far. So just in case you were wondering, this is going to be a bralette and it's also going to have a matching cardigan and skirt. My hope is to create YouTube tutorials for all of these, but it'll probably be some time before I'm actually able to get around to creating those. So with this yarn cake, I actually decided to use a new yarn ball winder. It was gifted to me and I'm going to talk about that in a second, but I actually really love this yarn ball winder because it helps a lot with tension control. And again, I'll go over all of this later. Tension control with this technique is really important. Otherwise, you might end up with some strands of thread that are too loose and it can give your garment a snagged look. And of course, we don't want that. So now I'm going to cake more thread because as you can see, I'm about to run out of yarn for this project. While this is winding, I'll then answer some questions. So this is the new yarn ball winder that I was talking about. It is an automatic yarn ball winder from Kato. Now with full transparency, they gifted me this yarn ball winder, but I do not make any commissions off of it. Also, they only sent it to me after I emailed them 3 times over the course of 3 months and basically begged them to send me one. The reason why I wanted this particular yarn ball winder is different than you may think. So yes, it's really nice that this automatically winds yarn for me, but the reason why I wanted this is because of these 2 pieces here. These are tension control knobs, and they have a spring that presses down on the yarn so that when it cakes, it will all be in even tension. This is really important when caking thread because you're caking multiple strands together. This is an older yarn ball that I caked a long time ago. I want to go ahead and unwind this a little bit, and I want to show you what the concern is here. So you can see right here on my thread yarn that this white strand right here is a little bit looser than the others. And now at face value, this doesn't really look like it's a big deal. And I'm used to working with yarn that kind of splits and does this sometimes, so it's really not the biggest deal to me. But some people might find this really annoying because if you aren't careful and you accidentally don't crochet with that piece of yarn held together, it can look like a snag on your garment. Now, of course, we don't want our garments to have any snags on them because we just made them and we want them to look pretty. So that's why these tension control knobs are really nice, because that way you can make sure that your tension is perfect. As long as you're careful, you don't need these tension control knobs. They're just really nice to have. If you're wanting to try this technique, just go slow, wind by hand, and then try to keep a medium amount of pressure while holding the yarn in your fingers. So I'm going to start basically by taking my thread and putting it in a box because it just makes it easier to move around. I'm going to gather all of the threads and align the tips of them so that they are relatively even. I'm going to pull up on them to make sure that they all have an even tension and then create a slip knot. I'm then going to feed the slip knot through the bottom hole and then through the tension control knobs. Once the thread is secure, I will place it into the slit on the top of the yarn ball winder. I'm going to gently smooth out the thread to make sure that it has an even tension. Then I'm going to use my hand to hold the thread high above the bobbins and then turn the yarn winder on. Here you see me holding the thread high above the bobbins so that they don't get tangled, but it is a lot easier if you actually put the bobbins on the ground. So the yarn winder does go faster, but I like to keep it relatively slow just because I want it to maintain an even and consistent tension. If it goes too fast, there's a higher possibility of the threads becoming disorganized and the tension getting a little wonky, and we don't want that. Now that the yarn winder is doing its thing, I'm going to answer some questions that people have had for me over the past year. So the first question is, doesn't it split? Yes, it does. But I would say that it's no worse than using Hobie's Sultan Solid or their ombre yarn cakes. It's also not that much worse than using bamboo or silk yarns that are stranded but very lightly twisted together. So if you're used to using any of those, this will be a walk in the park. But if you're someone who doesn't like those kinds of yarns, then obviously I would avoid this yarn as well because it's going to split and basically react the same exact way. Another question I've received is how many threads do you need to hold together to make a certain weight of yarn? So I can't really give you a definite answer on this because this is really going to depend. Like a sport weight yarn at one store is going to be different than a sport weight yarn at another store. I actually adjust the number of threads to the density and hook size that I want. And that's the beauty of caking your own yarn, is that you can adjust it to be however you want. I will say though, most of the times I gravitate towards somewhere between 10 to 16. However, my sweet spot is 12 threads. This to me is about a sport weight. I would say I probably use 12 threads the most. Another question is, doesn't yarn need to be twisted? Technically, the only purpose to having twist in yarn is to hold the fibers together so that they don't come apart when you are crocheting or knitting with them. This technique would basically be as if you were holding 2, 3, or 4 yarns together. But of course, instead, this would be more like 12 yarns together. Another popular question is, how much does this cost? So I did some math whenever I purchased all of this stuff. Now, let's say we are making a sport weight yarn, so like my classic 12 spools of thread. This cost is going to vary dependent on your location. I purchased my thread at Joann Fabrics, which unfortunately is closing, so take this pricing with a grain of salt. If I waited and timed all of my coupons correctly, each spool of thread would be about $2.10. So if I wanted to purchase 12 spools of thread, that would be approximately $25. Now, each spool of serger thread can range between 2,800 yards, and 3,000 yards. So just imagine getting even 2,800 yards of thread for only $25. In my opinion, this is very reasonably priced. Even if you don't have the budget to purchase this thread brand new, you can also thrift this. I have seen tons and tons of garage sales or estate sales that have boxes and boxes full of thread that people have purchased in the past for projects and then have never touched again. Another popular question is, what does the material feel like? I would say that it feels the exact same as yarn made from the same material. For example, the thread that I'm winding right here is technically made from polyester. So I think that it feels like polyester yarn. I have also tried caking mercerized cotton thread as well as rayon thread. Disclaimer, do not cake rayon thread because the entire thing just crumbles in your hands and it will end up as a big knot. If you ever want to crochet with rayon thread, just crochet it directly from the spool. Honestly, the mercerized cotton thread feels exactly like mercerized cotton yarn, and the rayon thread feels exactly like rayon yarn. So I have determined that this thing is probably big enough at this point, so I'm going to go ahead and take it off. I'm going to smooth out all of the threads so that they are mostly aligned, and then I'm going to cut the thread as close to the bobbins as possible. If I don't do this, the thread around the bobbins can sometimes get knotted, and just to prevent that, it's easier to cut them as close to the bobbins as possible. Then I'm just going to turn on the yarn ball winder and let it wind up the last bit of thread that is hanging off. And that is all there is to it. I'm going to go ahead and take this off. And you can see that this yarn cake is so pretty. It is so perfectly wound. Like, this is, I don't know, this is just so trippy. Like, it's so satisfying. If you look really closely, you could see that each of the yarn strands are like perfectly stacked on top of each other. There aren't any loose strands or loose threads anywhere on this, and that is all due to the tension control knobs on the yarn ball winder. After you have your yarn cake, all you have to do is start either pulling from the center, or you can pull from the outside and just start crocheting with it. The yarn does tend to split a little bit, so if you want to help with splitting, I've heard people put their yarn through a little bead, and apparently that helps keep the thread together. I personally don't use that tip because I don't think it's necessary, but again, to each their own. Whatever works for you is great. And like I have mentioned in the past, I am going to be using this yarn to finish up my next few projects, and I do plan on creating YouTube tutorials for those, so if you want to see how those come out, don't forget to like and subscribe to my channel, and stay tuned.